Okay, welcome, guys. Thanks for rejoining us. Again, a delight all the way from New Zealand. Joining us in cyberspace is the Olympic bronze medalist from 1972, the 1500 meters bronze medalist, and also the New York City Marathon winner of 1983. I think we saw it last time, guys, didn't we? That wonderful race that Rod Dixon, who's joining us. Thanks for giving us your time. Wonderful race you had that we saw on video with Britain's Jeff Smith. We saw you getting one over the pommies, as you like to call us. How are you, my friend? Nice to see you in 2 weeks' time.
Yeah, thank you, Matt and Spencer. It's great to be back. Great to be back with your people out there. And it's, we're New Zealand are making good progress. We haven't opened our borders yet, but we're still getting the odd isolated case. Rugby started, a lot of school rugby, soccer, winter sports have got together again, and so far so good. We're doing okay. Unlike the US and some of the states there, which are noticing spikes in the COVID. So it's one thing that we do understand in New Zealand is that we've got to get our kids immunity building. Get them. Make sure the school lunches are providing health and wellness to the kids. That they get their recess time. That they get out and move around and exercise, not sitting for long periods of time, and be creative with their art and their music. And the schools are noticing the changes and the attitude of the kids are getting more enthusiastic. And because I've been talking about this for 15 years. But now it's starting to come about that the parents are noticing that the kids are coming home and feeling a lot better about going to school. So it's cool.
Good, excellent stuff. And just to remind those of us that those of you that are joining us, if you're a fan of Rod Dixon, if you're a fan of 70s and 80s athletics, ask him a question about his career. Ask him a question about his rivals, be they some of the great New Zealand runners that we've spoke about last time, Peter Snell, John Walker, Murray Halberg, all those people. Ask him about the Brits, Coe, Vet, Cram maybe. But also I noticed there's one or two coaches in the thread. Please do ask Rod some questions about how he structured the training and really taking a lead off Spencer here, Spencer Duval, who's kindly organised this. I think what Rod can give us is a little bit of insight into the differences between the transition from focusing on the middle distances to the longer events, particularly the marathon. So use the chat thread, please, guys. Ask Rod a question. I'll keep talking to Rod. As soon as a question comes up, Spencer will frame that question. This is your session, not my session. So please keep your questions coming. Rod, before we wait for the first question, you were telling us a little bit about your preferred mode of exercise, which seems to be mountain biking. Say a little bit more.
Oh, yes. Well, I really did bring in biking back in the 80s into sometimes you'd go for that 2-hour 45 run on a Sunday. And when I was younger, you could go out and do a 30-minute shuffle in the afternoon. But I found that I wasn't recovering as well. So I started going for a ride on the bike. And that helped me to recover without the impact of running. And so I was able to turn over, get my rhythm going. And also, of course, I took up yoga and I took up cross training.
Yes.
In order to balance those long runs, and I started to respond. So, probably I was probably 31, 32 when I got my first bike, and then I preferred mountain bike rather than a racing bike or a road bike. I like the mountain bike because I would take on some of the country roads and forest trails that seem to be a lot more invigorating riding through the forest.
Time, Rod. Injuries, and obviously the cross training would help that. Go through any injuries that you had.
There's always soreness, tiredness. you found that the bulkier muscles were a lot more resilient. It was the fine tendons, the Achilles tendon, connective tissue that you really had to look after and make sure. And so massage was a big factor, and yoga was a big factor in getting that mobility back again, and strength and fitness back. Okay, we've got Mike's question here. What are your most favorite and least favorite training sessions? So you guys hear me okay? Oops. Okay.
Yes, Rod, I can hear you okay. Yeah. Just if you carry on.
Okay. So what I'll talk about the most favorite and least favorite training sessions. I think the most favorite always tended to be anything where I was training to run the mile. I had no problem with my 400-meter reps, my 200 reps. I used to like doing the 2-mile reps. So my favorite, of course, favorite runs through the forest, favorite runs on the golf course, on the beach, barefoot. Those are my favorite runs. I used to love doing that. And even some of the fartlek sessions on the beach, running cross country was fabulous. I used to love. My brother John, my coach, would say, "I want you to go out to Oakland's farm and run 5 circuits of the cross country course." And that I used to love doing that because there was fences and gates and bog and water and creeks and the gates on the farm fence lines. I used to love all that stuff. Now, my least favorite would have been probably, the reps of, say, 2 mile or 3 mile, 3 times that, 9 mile. We used to do that sometimes on the recreation ground, but then we started to move it so that it was out and back. So less turning to the left or less turning. So it was out and back. And so we started to settle down. I used to say to John, I just don't like running those 400 laps. We started to switch it so that you ran clockwise and anti-clockwise. But once we started to switch to out and back, I seemed to be a lot more comfortable and less stress and less tiredness. So we figured it out. Yeah.
Excellent. We spoke about those out and back last week, didn't we? That you did.
That's right. We did.
Excellent. We've got another question coming in from Graham Moffat, who attended last time. Graham is an excellent masters athlete. He's also a coach. Yeah, right. Can you take this one, Roddy? He seems to be asking about your view on periodization. The track season may not occur. We don't know whether in this country there's going to be a cross-country season. So what would you be doing with a group of young athletes if you were coaching them? What would your advice be?
Where there's no season, where there's no cross-country.
Yeah. There's no track, and there might be we don't know when competition will resume. So are you going to keep them on the boil? Are you going to regress them? Are you going to do any speed work? How can you help Graham with this one?
I think, to certainly to keep them in their aerobic training, and then from time to time give them a few time trials, and put them over. If you can take them to a cross country course, and get them to go out, and the slow ones go first, and make the faster ones start last, and see if you can catch them. Give them all a bit of an incentive. to race themselves. I always like, a time, reverse grid type of thing. So you put your top runners at the back and give those ones at the front. And sometimes you see where those kids who are used to finish second, third, or fourth, or even sixth, seventh, or eighth, you give them a chance to get out there. And some of them, when they get the chance and they see that the only one out front, they pick themselves up. And it's surprising how often those people or those athletes, boys or girls, actually step up to making the guys behind them work a little bit harder.
Excellent. Great answer. Hope that helps you out, Graham, a little bit. Question from Urban here, and I think I had the pleasure of doing a Lydiard course with Lorraine with this guy the other week. Urban, who's a coach. Yeah. Who are your favourite training buddies, first of all? Then we'll come on to who you raced. But did you do most of your work on your own, Rod, or were there athletes that you worked with periodically?
Yeah, well, I was with the running club. So we had and I may have mentioned the Nelson Amateur Athletic Harrier and Cycling Club, and that was formed in 1896. So it was a very, very much part of the culture and the community was the running club, and we had 400 or 500 runners weekends, and then of course a lot of the guys in my age, which were junior runners. We were allowed to run a Sunday run with the older runners. Of course, they would get to an hour, and they would, okay, you young kids, you can turn around and go back. We're going on to do 2.5 hours, 2:45. But they, had us doing about an hour and a half, hour 45. But so those friendships formed by running. It was always the talk test. So as long as you could have a conversation, you weren't overtraining. And we would sometimes go out, and then we would find our way back through the forest or back through somebody else's farmland. And so it was always a challenge to see whether we knew where we were going. And those guys, and some girls, I must admit, some of the girls would come out with us for our long runs. So it was very much a fun time where we built relationships, friendships that you could help and rely on one another, and that was very important. I loved the club system very much. I used to enjoy club nights, weekends with cross country, or sometimes obviously we had a club championships or run or a race, and so all that friendship built. And surprisingly enough, I'm back in Nelson and meeting up and catching up with a lot of those guys 40, 50 years ago. And it's very cool to sit down and have a beer with them and talk about old times. Very cool.
Excellent. And I think the second part of Urban's question was about your racing rivals. You told a really funny story about racing Sebastian Coe and his development. Do you remember a couple of weeks ago you talked about racing Seb over in this country? Who else do you recall racing against? I mean, we could talk all day. Mike Boyd and people like that, Kit Kano, Pekka Vasala. Tell us some stories about the people that you had great rivalries with.
Yeah. Well, probably, of course, the Americans like me to talk about my relationship or friendship with Steve Prefontaine. And, of course, I raced him, first of all, in Oslo before the Olympics, and he ran a 3,000 meters, which was world leading time. I finished back in 4th or 5th, I think. And then on to the Olympics. He ran the 5,000, I ran the 1,500. And then we came to Crystal Palace after the games, and I ran the 2 mile against him, Dave Black. Tony Simmons, I think, might have been in that race. And we went out, and Pre normally would take control and try and run us off our feet. And so I kind of hung in there in 3rd or 4th, and then I could see that the gap was starting to come. Pre was putting the hammer in, and so I got up and pretty well just hung on his shoulder, then behind him, came up to his shoulder, back behind him. And then with, I think, about 300 yards to go, I kicked, and I won the race. I set a Commonwealth record, a New Zealand record, and Pre ran a United States record. And I went up to shake his hand, and he told me to, you know what, it started with F. And I said, what's your problem? He said, all you did was sit on me. You know, he said, I'm sick of people like you. And I said, get over it. You know, but he wouldn't talk to me. So that was that. I went on, and then of course in 1973, I came across him in Oslo, in Stockholm, and I beat him in those two races. And then we went down to Milan to run a race. I convinced Walker to come with me. Let's go to Italy and race in Milan. And we went down, and there was Pre Fontaine and Ralph Mann, who was the hurdler, 400-meter hurdler, a silver medalist actually, Ralph. And they were in the hotel, and Pre stood up and he says, "You've got to be joking." You know, he was furious that I was there. And so we didn't even talk to him, you know. And but Ralph Mann came over and he says, "Hey, you guys have got to get over this." And I'm suggesting that we go have a dinner tonight and a beer together, and let's see if we can get over this. And we did. We came, and of course Pre wanted to drink me under the table. So we said, well, if you want to drink me under the table, let's put it now that we get up in the morning at 8 o'clock in the morning and we go out for our run. So whatever you want to drink tonight, we'll keep up with you, but training is at 8 o'clock in the morning. And of course, it was almost a week before we were racing anyway. And so, of course, we drank far too many beers and got up in the morning, and we went out for an hour and a half in the hot sun, and we pushed it. And Walker would push him, and he'd go with him, and then I'd sit back, and then I'd push him, and we couldn't break him, and he couldn't. You know, he tried breaking us, and I think after that, we showed incredible respect for one another, and friendship started, and that was it until sadly we lost him in May of '75. But no, he was cool. I liked Pre. We ran a lot of indoor races, I ran a couple of cross-country races, 2 miles, 3K. I didn't run a 5K against him, but he was a very good miler even then. He could run 3:55, 3:56, so he was always tough. A lot of respect for him. Pekka Vasala, after the '72 Olympics, I met him again in '73 and invited him to come to New Zealand for training. We ran in Sarajevo, and he came there, and we connected through our Olympic race. And we got talking, and I went and stayed with him at his house in Veeramäki. And then I invited him to come and train in New Zealand in early '74 before the European Championships, which were later that year. So he came and lived and trained in New Zealand for about 3-4 months. So he was fabulous. Dave Bedford, one of my favorites. Dave and I go back to 73 or 71. I met him first, but 73, of course, the English cross country, and of course, and then he came to New Zealand in '74 and was training for the Commonwealth Games, and spent a lot of time with him there, and that friendship has lasted, to now. I mean, we communicate. I often see him at the New York City Marathon. And we communicate. So he's been great. Brendan Foster was a great, top guy. I stayed with Brendan in Gateshead and ran some of his circuits with him. Haven't had much to do with him in the last years. Who else? Some really good, a lot of the good English runners. I remember Tony Stainings and Nick Rose were great. I really enjoyed racing with him. Mick McLeod, he was cool. I like Mick. Of course, Sebastian, of course, I met him a little bit later in my time. He was just coming through 76, 77. Steve Oved, of course, had a good friendship with Steve. In fact, a lot of the British boys I really did have a lot of time with. Hugh Jones. Hugh Jones was cool. I liked Hugh. Two-time winner of London Marathon, and then he was with AIMS, the Association of International Marathons. So I got to speak with him from time to time. So yeah, some good guys. Yeah. Okay. I can talk us through the marathon long session. How far and what pace did you run? So you guys can hear me okay, because I lost Matt before with the voice. So yeah. See, growing up in the club system, we were heavily influenced by Arthur Lydiard and the Lydiard principles and philosophy of training, which was laying that foundation, a good solid foundation. We're a bit like the pyramid, you lay a long foundation and then the pyramid goes up. So the foundation was all aerobic. Certainly there were pace training in there. There was hill training, but the long slow distance was very essential to laying a foundation for everything. And that actually remained the same even when I ran the mile to the 5K, the 10K, the half marathon, and the marathon. That base training remained the same. Now, the pace for my long runs really didn't vary too much right through. And it really was the talk test. If you can't carry on a conversation, then you're running too fast. So you had to be patient and to run those long runs just to build your mitochondria, just to build your foundation, to build your muscle tissue, allow and just not overstress the body. So we learned very quickly. We learned through, my brother was a big believer. He said, you don't improve when you train, you improve when you recover. So your training was very, very much based on recovery. And so those long runs were reflective on how well you recovered. And so if you weren't recovered by Tuesday, then you obviously trained too hard, or sometimes John would pick it up and he'd say, you went out with the faster group last Sunday, didn't you? And that's why, your times that I'm expecting you to run today are way off because you're just not recovered. And he said, I think the thing for you to do right now is to go for a run. We're not going to do any track work tonight. Just go for a long, slow run and do that for the next couple of nights until we get you back up. And of course, we did a heart rate test every morning just to make sure that it wasn't elevated. If it was elevated, you overtrained. So those were just the simple things. We kind of, recording your training and running a diary, running a log, gave you what was working and how you recovered and what was best suited to you in training. And a lot of the runners varied, but I tended to respond very well to interval fartlek type running. When you did the intervals, a lot of the recovery was a slow jog, sometimes a walk jog, and then start again. A lot of the runners wanted to run their rest, and of course they weren't quite ready for the next session. So my brother was very good. He understood. He would just from time to time give me 15 seconds of your pulse. He'd times it by 4, and he said, no, do another 30 seconds jog. You're not ready for the next session. So we were able to figure that out, and then those sessions were then recorded, and then sometimes as the training went on, I did 10 at that, and so sometimes he'd go to 12, and then the next time he'd go to 8, and then he'd push me out to 14, but he'd go back to 6. So it was always allowing that recovery. That was the key. How well were you recovering and how resilient you were to the workload. Some of the faster 200-meter running was too stressful on me, and so he stopped me running with the 400-meter, 800-meter runners. He said, it's too fast. You're better off. You're not good at much faster than 57, 58, whereas a lot of these guys are running 55s, and it just didn't give me enough to recover. So he figured that out. I could do 15 at 58 to 60, whereas the other guys could only do 10 at 55. So we figured out what suited them, what suited me. Oh, sorry, Matt, I can't hear you. Okay. So what was the maximum week mileage you did for marathon training? What percentage was easy running compared with more intense races? Well, the marathon training was always, to me, at aerobic pace, which was easy running. And so now and again, John would say, we're going to go out and back. We're going to do a 10 miler, so we're going out 5 miles and coming back 5 miles. So we'd go out 2.5 miles, and then he'd say, at that quarter effort, and then he'd say, right, I want you to step up to half effort now. And I'd do half effort to the turnaround, and then he'd say, right, I want you to do quarter effort for the next 2 miles, and then he'd get me to do 3/4 effort back to the start. And then he'd switch that around. So sometimes I'd go out at 3/4 effort, and then he'd say, right, half effort to the turnaround, 3/4 effort to the 3/4 mark, and then half effort to the finish. So all that was variation, so that I sensed judgment based on how I felt, based on effort. So he said, you've got to tell me, you've got to go out there and feel what half effort is, what 3/4 effort is. And then he would be there with the watch, and he would respond to what I felt was effort. And then, of course, then we would apply that again. And then he said, well, last time you ran 3/4 effort, you ran 3 minutes faster than what you did today for 3/4 effort. So he said, I think sometimes you push yourself a little bit too hard in 3/4 effort. So it was, the thing was that certainly it was very much those 3 favorite words I may have mentioned last time: learn by doing. So we would learn by doing that workout how I responded to that. And the key was to record it. In those days, of course, you had to write it down. You didn't have software to record everything, but it was very much based on learn by doing and feel, and building an understanding and a feeling of where you're at. So it was really, he would very, very much rely on how I responded to training and how I felt about it. And he said that we're trying to build instinct. And instinct is that you instinctively know what quarter effort is, half effort is, 3/4 effort. And that instinct never leaves you once you build that knowledge. And today I find a lot of the athletes don't have instinct because they have all that telemetry, and the coach is there with the computer, and he's getting all the data, and he's saying, okay, this is good. But the kid, the athlete is just doing what the coach does. He's not sensing. He's not feeling. You've got to have that feeling base, and you've got to know how you feel about something, so that when you're in a race, you know instinctively where you are in your effort at the pace. And so it's a lot of it's feeling based. Oh, sorry, can't hear you.
Matt, I think we've lost your mic at the moment. Can you log out and log back in again? I'll tee up the next question for us. Rod, here's a good one.
You ran across the globe. The conditions will differ in Asia and Africa compared to Europe. How did you adapt yourself and prepare the races mentally and physically? Well, good question. Good question. Yes, in those days, you had to travel, and often they weren't direct flights. There was a lot of stops and a lot of stopovers. And then, of course, the time change, and then the environment in which you're running in was a challenge. But there again, in our training, we learned to adapt. We learned to we had our instinct, and really, it was when we went somewhere different. Europe was pretty good because we learned very quickly from our first European season. But now and again, I did run in Japan a couple of times. And I think the first thing you had to understand was get into the local time zone as soon as you can. Don't keep looking at your watch and saying, well, it's midnight in New Zealand, I better go to bed. If it's midday there, then switch over to that midday and hang on for as long as you could and go to bed at the time they go to bed. And your time clock would adjust much quicker than trying to stay on your old time zone. Be very careful eating food. I didn't eat a lot of different food. I tried to stay as simple and as organic as I could. Obviously, a lot of the times you would sometimes stay in the city, but you'd find out where the local park was to go and run. And sometimes you weren't near a park, so the organisers would take you to a running park, like a big forest park, and so you'd run on that. So everything was based around, what would I do if this was in New Zealand? And you started to learn how to do that and adjust to the conditions, adjust to, and there again, locals would want to take you for a run, and most of the time they wanted to try and beat you. So, but all you did is I'd go straight to the back of the pack and run it with the last runners, and they go, why aren't you up with the leaders? And I said, no, I don't want to race today. I'm racing on Saturday. I don't need to have it. So I was very happy to say to people, look, if you want to beat Rod Dixon, here is your chance, because on Saturday you're not going to beat him, but today, on Wednesday, you can beat him.
You can beat him. Excellent. Are you hearing me now, Rod? Yeah?
Yes, yeah. Good, Pat. Good, Matt.
Great.
My impression in visiting New Zealand recently, the general race program is still as it was back in the 90s, pretty much, whereas UK is much more mixed up. Do you feel this is a factor in us POMs not producing the race goods internationally now a factor?
Yeah.
I think for me, and we learned this there again over the years, that consistency and I would come back to my brother John and say, I watched Vassila training, or I watched Bedford training, or I watched this guy, or I watched this person, or the Germans, Heinz Wellman or Wessinghager. I'd watch this guy, that guy, and John would say, yes, that's good boy, good boy. And then he'd come back to me and he said, well, I don't see anything that they're doing that is of any real value to what we're doing. Now and again, Pekka Vassila was very, very good with recovery training. He was very, very, very good on Finnish massage, having sauna, and taking that nap in the afternoon. He was very good like that. And so I learned to listen to my body a little bit better. And so some of those things I picked up. But most of the things we had learned during our journey, and those that worked for me, I stayed with. I didn't really, wasn't easily influenced by other runners. When I must admit, when Dave Bedford was in New Zealand, he was training up to 200 miles a week, 3 sessions a day, and that was just not. I was just not capable of doing that at all. So we, I went to John and I said, "Do you think I should be training 3 times a day, to beat these guys?" He said, "No, you train, you stay with what you're training." Now and again, I loved Percy Cerati and what he did with Elliot. So we did adopt a lot of the sand dune running, bare feet. And I used to love running bare feet in the sand and doing hill sprints on the sand. So that was cool. That was something we did a little bit more of. Did a lot more barefoot running on the golf courses and the fields. John understood that I like to run barefoot, and that was, of course, was good to strengthen the muscles, strengthen the feet, balance and coordination. In the sand, you can't run fast. You've got to run efficiently. So those are some of the things that we did. So overall, I think the training stayed pretty consistent. Somebody mentioned the word periodization before. And yes, so some of the, I would definitely have that easy week. Every 4 to 5 weeks, we would have a cutback. Didn't happen too much in the foundation program, or conditioning program, because I wasn't requiring a cutback. But certainly when fartlek training, pace training, hill training, we did do periodization where we would say, right, this week you're going to do Tuesdays and Thursdays, you're going to do hill work, but you're going to do it no harder than half effort. And so, whereas normally you would do 3/4 effort or 7/8 effort on and so that the periodization week was a cutback week to recover. Basically, that's what it was, and to give me, just rather than that push every day. I mean, I don't think we did. John picked up that very quickly. I ran against a lot of athletes that were just, hard training 7 days a week. Well, that just did not suit me. Did not suit me. So we learned that.
Yeah. Yeah. The Iron Curtain. What was your experience of the Iron Curtain athlete? Did you have any?
I ran. I actually ran in Czechoslovakia, and I ran in Hungary. And back in the 70s, so we felt that was, Poland especially. Poland was, I couldn't believe how difficult it was. People lined up for the supermarket. People lined up to go shopping for a sweater. I couldn't. That was all different. So the athletes, of course, we mentioned good friends. Bronislaw Malinowski. He was a great friend. I loved Bruno. Yeah, and we became great friends. He came to New Zealand. We had, when I was with the television organising the track series, and I wanted all the Polish, Ivana Savenska and the javelin throwers and pole vaulters, high jumpers, and Bruno with a couple of his. And I said, Bruno, why don't you bring some of your emerging runners with you, a couple? We can't take more than 2 because it's expensive. And so he brought them, and it was most appreciative. We gave them the opportunity to come to New Zealand. And in fact, when he came to my hometown, he was fascinated with water skiing. He'd never done water skiing. And he said, I want to try the water skiing. And I said, okay, so you've water skiing? He said, no. He said, I want to try water skiing. And so, okay, we put him on the skis, and the boat took off, and he went underwater, and it kept going, and the next thing is the skis flew up in the air, but the rope was still tight. And what's he doing underwater? And then all of a sudden the rope let go and Bruno came up and we went and got him out of the water and said, now what was all about? He said, I just couldn't get out of underneath. And I said, I thought you said you could water ski. Oh no, that is my first time. So it was fabulous. He loved everything about New Zealand, and that gave him something very special as opposed to his life in Poland. And that was, back 70, 73, 74. Yeah. Please talk about me through how you prepare yourself nutritionally going into a marathon and during it. I'm a coach and athlete. Lucy, we, wonderfully, I grew up in a farming, and so, my parents and my family we grew basically all our vegetables, and we lived in Nelson, which was the fruit bowl of New Zealand. So it was always very easy to get fresh vegetables, fruits. We didn't have a lot of processed food in my day growing up, thankfully. Certainly, my mother would say, if you can't pronounce the ingredient, then you shouldn't eat it. So we learned to read the ingredients, and if you couldn't pronounce it, you weren't allowed to eat it. So one ingredient we did pronounce okay, and that was sugar. But my parents absolutely, and with what I do with my kids, 5210, which is 5 fruits and vegetables, 2 hours maximum screen time, 60 minutes of and 0 sugar sweetened beverages. So it's we were very, very much that, and it was my parents. I don't think I had a soda before I was 10 years old, and then really? I remember a friend brought that Coca-Cola to school, and I almost threw up. I couldn't believe it. It was, so of course, and then my mother heard that somebody said, "Oh, young Rodney, he drank a bottle of Coca-Cola today," and she put me in the bathroom for an hour as punishment. So yeah. So it was, so we learned to eat very organic, very fresh. Being farmers, sheep farmers, lamb was a big thing for us. In fact, chicken, if anything, was a special meal. But lamb, and we virtually ate all the lamb, all parts of the lamb, because it was on the farm. We weren't giving growth hormones or antibiotics, or we weren't putting fertilizer on the grass. So we ate organically, healthy, drank water, and so that really flowed into my running. So we learned to eat. We grew up on three vegetables: meat and potatoes, and 3 vegetables. That was the standard dinner, Yeah. But as I grew, then I, started to respond to having more pasta. In those days, of course, it was pretty organic. There wasn't a lot of gluten in the pasta. My family had an Italian family who made their own pasta, and we ate that. So I realized rice was a big thing, brown rice. And one thing that, when I remember I came back from a run once, and I couldn't turn the door handle. I was absolutely hyperglycemic. I was exhausted. And my mother was shocked that I would run to 0, that she said, "You can't even stand up," because, she didn't understand hyperglycemia, and I kind of didn't really until I learned what it was. And of course, all I'd done was gone out for a nearly 3-hour run, and all I'd done is drink water out of the creek, and I ran out of fuel. So we had to learn how to fuel ourselves. And my mother would always have in the fridge a bowl of rice and a stewed apple or stewed rhubarb. And when I used to go for a run, she would give me a little plastic bag. We didn't have baggies in those days. She'd put rice and apple sauce in a bag and put a knot in it. She said, now you eat that when you feel tired. And so, of course, if we went up through the country, I said, well, I'm going to put that in the tree and I'll eat that one after about an hour or so. And I would take an unbelievable, I used to run comfortably for an hour and 3/4, 2 hours, knowing that if I had that little bit of food, I was away. But I could only really run about an hour and a half on fuel. So I knew I had to fuel myself. And so as I started to run marathons, the same thing of those long Sunday runs, I would go out and put around my circuit little food bags that I could have while I ran. Now and again, I would push myself to run completely almost hypoglycemic, because that taught me to use my fats better. And so, so as the marathon came along, I remember I talked, with Jack Foster, our great marathon runner, Dave McKenzie, who of course won Boston Marathon, and I talked to people, the marathon runners, and asked them how did they eat and how did they prepare, and they said it was just like you've got a tank of gas. It's just like a car, and you're on an economy run, and you've got to learn to how to use that fuel over that period. But he said, if you can't fuel yourself for 2 hours, then you're going to have food somewhere. And so when I started running a few marathons, I put that food out. And in my first marathon in New Zealand, I actually did put some rice, and a friend of mine gave it to me at about 15 mile. And I had that, washed it down with some water, and that just gave me that glycogen boost. That then I had that second wind. But I remember reading, of course, at the 20-mile mark, you hit the wall, and all the pictures and the cartoons always had a brick wall, and the runners were hitting it, and that was you hit the wall, and what it was that you ran out of fuel. That was what it was. So I learned to make sure that I didn't run out of fuel at 2 hours. I would give sustenance at about 15 to 16 mile, and allow that couple of miles for it to settle in and adjust, and then away I go. So it was water, and then of course some of the gels. I tried a few of the gels, but they were a wee bit too sugary for me. So I tended to use honey, New Zealand Manuka honey, and just pour that over the rice and make little rice cakes, and I would eat those. Yeah. So I figured it out.
Excellent. Do we have another question, Spencer? Yes. Talk us through what went through your mind. Mental preparation for the Olympics.
1 hour before, 20 minutes. Oh, 5 minutes before. Well,
this is a memory test.
Yeah. Well, of course, I really should say that, our goal was to, at the Olympic, of course, our goal was to make the semi-final. And so to run the first heat and get into the semi-final, and anything that happened after that was wonderland, and so really getting through to the final. And I remember I had to book. We had to go over to the communication centre, and I was able to book a 10-minute call to New Zealand at 4 o'clock that afternoon. So I went over there and I called and I spoke to my brother and we talked. And he said, "Well, here it is. You've made the final." And he said, "So everything you do now is a bonus." It's and so he said, "So." The first thing he said, "Do you feel nervous?" And I said, "No, because I've never been in this environment before." And he said, "That's good." He said, "Everything you do is a learning experience. So don't cloud it with nervousness, and don't cloud it with don't panic. Just carry on what you do normally." He said, "So make sure the guys in the room with you. Don't be on your own. Have a few laughs. Go and have breakfast. Go and have lunch. Do the things that you normally do. Don't change what you've been doing. Don't go to bed early than you normally do, because what you're going to do is you're going to go to bed early and then you're going to lie there awake worrying about everything. So go to bed at the normal time and go to sleep. And, that was kind of very simple for me to hear that from John, because he was very good. And so fortunately, I was in a room with Dick Taylor, who went on to win the 1974 Commonwealth 10,000 meters. So he was in my room with him, and Terry Manners, the marathon runner, and then Jack Foster and Dave McKenzie were also marathons. They made sure they came down and spent the whole that night and the next day with me, so that Dick Taylor was Mr. Funny, so he always had jokes, he always had a laugh, and I remember Arthur Lydiard and Bill Bailey came into the village, and they came to visit just 5 minutes, and he said, just focus and stay in your zone. You've got great friends here. They're all supporting you. Your family and home in New Zealand, they will be watching. So don't panic. so I think that was pretty good. And there again, I was pretty balanced from all the running that I'd done in my time. And you always had that little funny feeling. But most of you knew that I'd had this before, and I knew what to do. And so it was 2 hours before, 10 minutes before we finally left the village to get, and I didn't want to catch the bus over, I wanted to walk over. So Graham Davey, who was our athletics manager, it was only about a 10-minute walk, and he walked with me. He wanted to carry my bag. I said, no, I like carrying my own bag. So little things like that. And he was just there to support me, and he just it was cool, because it just seemed like natural, not so much another race. You go to the stadium and whoops, 50, 60,000 people, and this is the Olympics, and that's kind of so I actually rose to the occasion. I love that atmosphere, and I'd been to the stadium for the 10,000 final and steeplechase, things like that. So I got the feeling of what it was like to be at the stadium with the roar of the crowd. I'd never run in front of a crowd that big, but I got the feeling, and I started to like the idea of being down there where 60,000 people were looking at me. I thought that was kind of cool.
Excellent. Fantastic. Spencer, do we have another question? Yeah. Your peak performance. Yeah. When was your peak, Rod?
I think the peak performance was 1983 at the New York City Marathon. That was a race that I trained for 6. Really, people say, how long did it take you to train for the New York City Marathon? And I said 33 years. I was 33 years old, and I said, that when I realized what I had done in training and what I had done to get to that point, and all the 72 Olympics, and then 74, I think we talked about 1974 when I ran the 1500 in Christchurch, and it was like I finished the race and I looked up at the scoreboard and I go, hold on, I have just run the 5th fastest time in history and finished 4th in the race. How does that work? 1976, where I finished 4th again, less than 1 second behind the winner. Having gone into the Olympics as number 1 ranked in the world, and I full of expectation. I hadn't been beaten for 2 years over 5,000 meters. Huge disappointment. And then 77, 78, of course, I was all set to run the Commonwealth Games there, 5,000 meters, and I had my shoes stolen. So
Oh.
that threw me completely out, and I couldn't run well, and yet I went on to Europe and beat everybody. Then 1980, the boycott of the Olympics, so I couldn't go back to make good what I'd lost in 76. Then I started road racing, and all that I did through road racing and the amazing records, and then I decided that I was going to run the New York City Marathon, and that's when I trained more so on a very disciplined journey that I'd never done before. I had been easily drawn into running races and traveling and going here and going there, but this was the time that I was going to do this right. I wasn't going to be drawn away from doing this. I wasn't. People called me up and they go, "We'll give you $10,000 to come and run a race," and I said, "No, I'm in training." And why are you in training? I'm running. I have committed to the New York City Marathon, and it's not just a weekend commitment. This is a life commitment. And so I think, by the time I got to the New York City Marathon, I realized that this race was going to be the time it was. My life, it defined who I was. What I did at the finish defined who I was. And I was inspired by, we talked about Sir Edmund Hillary and all these great people. And then it was time for me to start putting back into my community what they had given to me. And I realized that it was about the kids, it was about the next generation. So, and I'm still.
Excellent. Do we have another question, Spencer? Coming up to the hour mark. Yeah, steeplechasers. You mentioned Malinowski. Your own attempt at the steeplechase, was it 8:26 you ran there, Rod?
8:29. 8:29.
8:29. Yeah. What sort of background then, Rod?
Well, then I was country in our club, and and we in our cross country we had gates. We had gates to jump over. We had and I was fascinated with this, and we had to run through creeks, and we had to run through, and they were real cross country in those days. And so when it came to, I was fascinated once again with Malinowski, the steeplechaser, who could come out and run 3:56, 57 for a mile. And he could run, he could run against you over 3,000 meters flat in 2 miles. And he was unbelievable. And yet when he ran steeplechase, it was poetry. He was, and I was fascinated by that. And I was always fascinated with the hurdlers, the 110-meter hurdlers, David Henry and the 400-meter hurdles. And I was fascinated
Mexico,
with technique. I loved the technique. Now, I wasn't good on technique, but I could get over the hurdles, and so I was in Oslo, and the Arnie Haukvik, who was the meet director in those days, he said, we would like you to run the 10,000. And I go, oh, no, I don't want to run 10,000. He said, well, what do you want to run? He said, John Walker's running the 1,500, so you can't run that. I said, I'll run the 800. He says, no, we don't, you're not an 800 meter run. So I looked at it and I said, I'll run the steeplechase. And he said, have you ever run one? And I said, yes, I've run one. I had never run one. So, of course, I went out there and, gosh, I think the first lap, I was probably 10 yards behind them. I walked a water jump. I couldn't see. Somebody was in front of me, and I said, I've got to see what I'm doing here. I'm not used to just running on instinct. So, but I learned pretty quickly, I learned to keep to the left or keep to the right of the other runners and get my view so that I could get my own step going. And then I got into my rhythm. And then I got back up with the leaders. And then I think that Ray, they ran 8:26 or 8:25, which was only about 3 seconds off the world record, and I ran 8:29, and I set the New Zealand record. So it was pretty cool. I love that, and I ran a couple more, all around 8:29, 8:31, 8:32. So I thought that was pretty good for me. But I didn't certainly learn better techniques. I think some of the runners used to laugh. They said, oh boy, Dixon, if you just learn to hurdle properly, you could be good at this. So,
brilliant. I think we've got a question about S&C training. I know obviously your career 70s and 80s. Did you you might not have called it S&C, but did you do anything in your training, Rod, which was strength based, strength and conditioning?
Strength and conditioning. Is that what you mean? Yeah. Absolutely. I was very fortunate when we were younger, 16, 17, 18. Our mailman that delivered the newspapers was a yoga trainer. He was a yoga, so basically strength and conditioning. And he talked about adapting to your own body weight, to be efficient with your own body weight. So he didn't say, come to the gym and lift weights. He said, I want you to do chin-ups. I want you to do dips. I want you to do push-ups. I want you to do squats. I want you to do scissors and all this. And he said, so we learned with the chin-ups and things to work with your own body weight. And to a point, I think I could do, 50 push-ups. I could do 25 chin-ups. I could do things. And it was interesting because I did Superstars one year, and everything was based about your body weight, based on your body weight. And so, of course, here was a skinny runner, and I was beating half of these rugby players in that because I was more efficient with my body weight. And then you actually had to lift off a stand and walk out with it and then drop it and put it over your head. Well, I was good doing curls and push, that sort of thing, especially with that. And I knew that the key to do weightlifting is to get your body weight underneath the weight as quick as you can and lock your arms out. So it was you jumped down and you lifted it up and then you locked it, and then you used the power of your quads, which as a runner, I could stand up. And I finished second in the weightlifting. And of course, because I lifted my own body weight. I think I was about 150 pounds, and I weightlifted. And a lot of the other competitors couldn't lift their own body weight. So here was a skinny runner. Oh, wow, he's amazing. So that was all part of what we did. And our training was to be efficient in our own body weight and learn. So yes, strength and conditioning was very much part of that, very much part of yoga was very important. And yoga moves where you would hold a pose, and you'd have 20 seconds at that or 30 seconds at that. And part of it was getting all that connective tissue stretched, get a full range of motion. And that, so a lot of that, and John would say to me sometimes, you're not doing a long run today, you're going to go hiking. And he said, so go into the mountains and take your lunch with you and hike all the way through to Poloris and back around and come back through the Wairau Gorge. And that was a 5-6 hour walk. And I would go out there and walk. I wasn't allowed to run. I walked. And that strengthened my connective tissue, the ankles, the knees. And it worked those muscles that you don't normally work when you run, because running is about efficiency. It's about running A to B efficiently. Now, walking, you use actually more muscles when you walk. So he used to send me off into the mountains for 6-hour walks. So that was pretty cool. I used to take the 303, and if I saw a deer, I'd shoot it.
Great stories. Any final questions for Rod as we've gone past 10 o'clock? A
Ron
question
Hill.
about memorabilia. You remember?
Yeah.
Do you remember Ron Hill? You must have. I don't know whether you raced against Ron at any point.
Totally. Ron Hill was a legend for us New Zealanders, and of course, you know, our absolute hero was Jack Foster, who at 42 years old won the silver medal in the 1974 Commonwealth Games, and Jack was a wee bit of a Ron Hill, lovely, fabulous guy. So yeah, Ron Hill, and but one day we'll do a Rod Dixon 1983 T-shirt, but we'll figure that out. I do all the stuff now for fundraisers for my foundation, because every dollar, it works out about every $5 I range, we can put a kid through. We call it a scholarship. We put them through the program. And these are a lot of the underserved communities, low-income families, where a lot of these kids don't participate in sport because their parents can't afford. And some of these kids, I tell you, they come to school hungry, and it's just extraordinary. And so I work with those schools, and I now come across kids who will come up to me in high school now, and they'll come up and they'll give me a hug, and I go, "Now, who are you?" And they go, "I was in your running program 10 years ago, and I'm in high school, and I'm going to be the first in my family to go to college because you inspired me to be the best that I could be here in the Tortoise." He said, "And all I wanted to do was get your medal." And he said, "And that gave me the incentive." He said, "You know, if it had been first, second, third," he said, I never used to like sport because I could never finish in the top three. And so if you're not first, second, or third, you're a loser. See? And so kids know now that it's okay to be the Tortoise, because the Tortoise actually slow and steady won the race.
Sure. Just remind people listening how they can donate, Rod, to the foundation. Just remind us.
It's the kidsmarathonfoundation.org. Just go in there and there's a wee donate button. And we're more than happy to take millions of dollars if you want to give it to us.
Rod, I have a final question. It's been a pleasure talking to you, but when can we expect to see you back on these shores? Have you any plans post-lockdown, post the pandemic to come and see us in England?
Yeah, well, and I didn't mention Steve Jones, my great mate, great friend, we've talked about going back to Wales. I ran in Wales a few times, so we've talked about doing that. Of course, I've seen Bedford and Mark Hutchinson and Tim Hutchins and Wendy Sly, of course, and they all said, "Oh, come back and visit." And I said, "Yeah, we will." So when we're able to, I'm going to come back. And I know that the London Marathon have got a program going with the Daily Mile in schools, and it's something that I'd like to come and talk to those people, because we've been doing the Daily Mile for 10, 15 years. And the great thing in New Zealand is that the Athletic Federation has reinstated the mile run in New Zealand as a championship. So now when I go to the kids at school, I can talk about running the mile instead of a kilometre. And the kids love that, because they go home and tell their parents that they're running the mile, and their parents don't even understand. So it's kind of cool.
Excellent. Rod, just to thank you on behalf of England Athletics, both yourself and Spencer Duval, for the work that you've put in, for giving your time freely as a volunteer to support us. It's been a real privilege as a fan, as a coach, and as a runner myself to speak with you. Thanks for all those memories that you provided with us, and all the coach education that you've given us. And Spencer kindly there would also pass on his thanks, and he's also saying that more of these webinars are available at the link.
Yeah.
So here's saluting you, Rod. Thank you.
Thanks to Spencer, and thanks to you, Matt. It's been a pleasure to share this with you. And I know quite a few Kiwis have been watching, and they've been sharing it around. And it's about the next generation. I enjoy everything I do. I'm inspired by the next generation of these kids. And, we just want health and wellness, build immunity, and just have fun at school. Have fun. Don't take it too seriously. Have fun.
Excellent. Thank you, Rod. Thanks everybody for listening. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank